Revelation 3:14 is one of the more misunderstood verses and also one of the more misinterpreted and misapplied verses in the Bible. It is misunderstood and a difficult passage for many Christians, and it is used by many anti-Christian, anti-Trinitarian, anti-Jesus groups to try to push that Jesus himself is saying that he's not God. Revelation 3:14 reads, "And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation." So what Jesus is saying here, he's talking about himself. He says he's the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. And that phrase right there, the beginning of God's creation, that is the phrase that we're really going to focus on in this video. And we're going to discuss what it actually means, how we're supposed to understand it and interpret it and apply it. The question that usually comes up with this verse when it's brought up is that if Jesus is God, then how can he be the beginning of God's creation? So they think they look at the verse like it's saying that Jesus was the first thing that God created in the creation account. And that's not really what it's saying. That may be what it looks like initially, but we're going to break it down. We're going to look at some other verses and we're going to help get a clear understanding of what this verse says and how it doesn't contradict, but it ties into other verses in the Bible. So the verse, again, it says, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. So let's look at the word beginning because that's where everything really hinges on, and where that's the one word in the entire verse that creates this issue and this topic of debate. So the word beginning in the Greek is archē, and it actually means that by which anything begins to be, the origin, active cause. And also the Lexham Theological Word Book states that archē is a noun that denotes that which is first, either in time or in rank and authority. We're going to discuss a little bit later about how this definition of the word archē, it can't refer to time in the way that we think of it, and it also is applying to the rank and authority of Christ. So our understanding of the word beginning when we look at the Greek in Revelation 3:14 should really mean that it's referring to the source, origin, or cause of God's creation. So if we read it with that in mind, it would read something like the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the source, the beginning, or the cause of God's creation, right? So we see how that's not saying that Jesus is the first of creation, but he's the cause, he's the origin of it. He's the reason that the creation exists. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's not saying that he's created. He's saying he's the creator. And this isn't just something we see only in Revelation. If you've read John, I mean, the first 3 verses in the book of John are some of the most famous, well-known verses. People will try to argue that John 1 contradicts Revelation 3. And that's not the case, because when you have the actual understanding and grasp of what Revelation 3:14 is saying and how it's describing Jesus as the origin or cause of creation, when we read John 1:3 specifically, it reads, "All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made." These 2 verses don't contradict, but they actually teach the same thing, that everything that has ever come into existence has come to existence through Jesus Christ. For him to be the source or cause of things to be created, this means he must be eternal as God is, and is uncreated as God is. He exists outside of all creation as God does, and all creation begins to exist by and through Jesus. Think of it this way. If Jesus was created, and the Bible teaches that everything in creation was created by and through Jesus, because he's the source, then that means that he had to be the creator and the source of his own creation, which doesn't make sense. He can't not be created and then be a part of his creation, because that means he existed before his creation, right? It can be a little confusing, but just think of it like Jesus is the source of everything created because he existed before any creation, all creation, eternally as God. He is outside of space, matter, and time, right? And so that's why as we read John 1, especially the first 3 verses, it is extremely important to us in regards of the deity of Christ, and more specifically his eternal existence as God, because that is a attribute that solely applies to God and his character and being. So John 1 reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made." So obviously anybody that has ever read the Bible can draw the parallel of John 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1. That should instantly ring a bell in our mind and take us to that verse. And that's exactly what the author's intent was. Genesis 1:1 reads, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." The author is mirroring the same format as Genesis 1:1, because he's making the case theologically that Jesus is not only divine, he's not only God, but he's the person responsible for the biblical creation account. The account that you read in Genesis 1, those actions that you read were Jesus. That was him acting. And that becomes more evident as we read through the 3 verses in John. "In the beginning was the Word" reads similarly to "In the beginning God created." There's a similarity here that we should notice. In the Genesis verse, we see that God existed before the beginning, since he created. He cannot create and then be created. So in the Genesis verse that we read, we see that God existed before the beginning, since he created. And the act of creating time, space, and matter requires a cause that transcends that said beginning and creation. So for Jesus to create time, space, matter, everything that makes up our reality and all creation, he has to be above that. He has to be sovereign over that and have power over that. So John here is playing off the same understanding in verse 1 as he teaches us that this word was not created, for the word was already there. Note the word was in the verse. The word was with God in the beginning. And nowhere do you read that this word was created at a separate time outside of this creation. For that'd be obviously impossible, like we just said, because then you'd already have a creation account. And we know that the Bible teaches there's one creation account. There's not two. There can't be two. And neither do you see that the word was created with the rest of creation. And it's actually the opposite. John even claims that this word was God, the same God responsible for creation. So then when we get to verse 2, it's really just kind of restating verse 1. But verse 3 is extremely valuable to us theologically, because John doesn't just say that the Word was there in the beginning with God, but that he was the person of God responsible for the creation of all things. All things. Nothing that was created was outside of him. For something to be the cause or source of all creation, this implies an independence, an uncreated nature that exists eternally, which we know that is the divine substance, that is God, that makes up the Trinity. So John 1, when faithfully interpreted, can only be seen as an advocation for Jesus being the Word, being eternal, being uncreated, and being the creator as the source, as the origin, as the cause of all creation. So think about how these 3 verses in John 1 go along perfectly with Revelation 3:14 with this understanding. It doesn't contradict. It doesn't bring any confusion. They both interlock and they connect and they flow together and they carry the same meaning theologically and they convey the same message. They convey one clear unity of thought. That being, Jesus is God. He's not only God, but he's the creator of all things that we read in the creation account. He is the God who created the heavens and the earth. So I hope that clears up any misunderstanding that you or someone else may have on Revelation 3:14 and how it relates to other verses in the Bible, more specifically the first 3 verses of John 1. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you guys in the next one.